where are we right now? As we sit here Tuesday morning, I believe he's at the training ground. He was in yesterday receiving treatment. I think Eddie will probably come in at some point today to see him. I don't know that for sure. I'm waiting on information on that at the moment. The rest of the players are off. They return back tomorrow. But look, without doubt, he's going to have to sit down and face up to Eddie, explain his situation. Eddie Howe's been in this situation a number of times before throughout his career, and he's brought players back on side and kept them, managed to keep the morale high. But I would suggest if he's of any situation he's been in like of this will be the toughest one to try and bring it around if they fail to sell Isak. But look, I firmly believe that if Newcastle bring in a replacement and they're quite far down the line with doing so, then Isak will be allowed to leave if Liverpool stump up an offer that they deem acceptable.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that momentarily. My next question was actually going to be the mood amongst the fan base and indeed the club, but you addressed that there, so that can be left for now.
Well, I think it's probably just worth adding this, that I stood outside St James's Park 3 weeks ago and talked about the possibility of Newcastle having both Alexander Isak and Hugo Ekitike in the ranks next season. And I was like, wow, that'll whet the fans' appetite. That's a real game changer, even just for one season, just to have Isak to play alongside Ekitike before selling him next year. Newcastle United must be the only club in the world that within 3 weeks go from potentially having both of them to then having none of them. So that probably gives you an idea of how the fan base feel at the moment. However, because they're quite far down the line and it looks like there's a real chance that they're going to sign Benjamin Sesko, I do feel that is a bit of a consolation for them, and I feel there's an excitement around him, and I think that's maybe just taking the edge off the whole situation at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure there'll be an acceptance that maybe the club's hands were tied and, they couldn't have moved any other way if indeed it does come to pass that Sesko arrives and Isak does move on. And you alluded to it a moment ago, Keith, in terms of the potential fee, in terms of what it's going to take. Obviously, we know the replacements probably do need to be through the door, at least 1 foot through the door. You mentioned Sesko, Johan Viss has also been mentioned. But in terms of the money, in terms of the price tag Liverpool will need to stump up to make this happen, there's been talk of Liverpool sort of initially approached with 110 million, 120 million. There's been 135 million suggested. What's your understanding of what that fee might be?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, before I touch on the fee, in terms of Newcastle replacement, Sesko would be seen as a like-for-like replacement for Isak, and that would allow Isak to go. Wissa, who you mentioned a moment ago, he's seen as the replacement for Callum Wilson. Remember, Newcastle lost him. They only had two out-and-out strikers. So Wissa would kind of be seen as the number two, and Sesko would be seen as the number one. Wissa alone would not, the potential signing of Wissa alone would not be enough to allow Isak to leave. They need to bring in someone like Sesko. So that's where they are with it, and that's why I could imagine most Liverpool fans have got a keen eye on Newcastle. The Newcastle Manchester United tug of war over Sesko, because I think they probably understand and realise by now that if Sesko goes to Newcastle, then your chances of getting Isak are a lot higher. In terms of a fee, look, I've been saying all along that Newcastle are looking for £150 million. That is the value they've put on his head. What are we now? 3.5 weeks of the transfer window to go. Liverpool's first formal bid was £110 million plus add-ons. I think the deal was about between 115 and 117 million. There's a big gap between 115 and 150, like a £35 million chasm there. So look, I think as much as Newcastle feel he's worth 150, the fact he's agitating to leave, causing a bit of a problem behind the scenes, I would expect the agreement to be somewhere in the middle there. How much exactly? I don't know. It's very difficult for me to put a figure on, but I think with just 3 weeks of the window left, I think it'd be difficult for Newcastle to get 150. I'm not even sure if Liverpool have got 150. You've spent a lot of money this window anyway. But what I would say is, in a roundabout way, actually, it feels like Liverpool have got a little bit of strength in this, because if Newcastle bring in Sesko, they've got their signing, they've got their replacement, they know they've got a player who's agitating to leave. And I think it would be difficult financially for Newcastle, like almost impossible for Newcastle to hold on to both Sesko and Isak in terms of wages and their PSR situation. So they are going to have to sell him. Whether they can keep hold of the two of them, I don't know. But I don't see Newcastle selling for 110. Like I can't see Newcastle going to Liverpool and saying, actually, that offer you put in, you can have him. Like that has been rejected. I think they're going to have to I think they're going to have to go to Liverpool and say, look, give us a little bit more, be fair about this, and then they'll come to some kind of agreement. Whether that's 120, 130, 125, I don't know. I think 150 would be really, really difficult in this situation. But I also don't think Newcastle are going to go back with a begging bowl and say, bring back your 110. So they're going to have to negotiate, and it'll be interesting to see what they eventually come up with.
No, most definitely. And obviously, the structure of the deal would be fascinating as well. But Liverpool, obviously, in terms of PSR, you're right to say we've spent an absolute king's ransom this summer because we have. But the PSR headroom seemingly is still there, according to people in the know in that department. And also, we're anticipating and somewhat expecting the departure of Darwin Nunes somewhat imminently. So that will give us a little bit more in the coffers. And just finally, you've touched on it. Sorry, Keith, go on, you go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I've been saying to anyone who's willing to listen, and you might scoff at this yourself, but I've been saying for a long time, if in the case of not being able to, I wasn't sure how it was going to work at this stage. This was a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't realise Newcastle were desperate to bring in a replacement first. But I was saying to anyone who was willing to listen, take Nunes. Just say we'll take Nunes as part of the deal. I know he's misfiring at times, and like you don't really know what you're going to get with him. But I can see he's a sort of player that I think Eddie Howe could refine a little bit, and I could imagine coming up to the northeast with the character that he's got. He's a bit hot-headed, isn't he? I could see the fans actually really liking him. And he scored a few good goals at St James's Park over the last few years as well. I don't know. I just thought that if Liverpool had been really desperate to to buy Isak, Newcastle could have said, all right then, well, but you're going to throw Nunes in as part of the deal. But it appears that's not the case. Maybe I'm in the wrong job. I don't know.
No, listen, I'm completely with you. But gone are the days seemingly of swap deals. They're not a thing anymore. I think they're outdated now. But you're absolutely right to mention his record at St James's as well. There was that famous, stroke infamous, depending on which way you look at it, comeback victory that he initiated. Yeah, just finally, you've touched on it once or twice and we've gone along, so I'm pretty sure I know roughly what you might say to this. But in terms of what happens next, in terms of what your gut's telling you, how this all gets resolved and where Alexander Isak is plying his trade come the end of the window, and not just the end of the window, but come the 25th of August when Liverpool head to St James's Park, which in of itself is a storyline. Who might Alexander Isak be playing for?
Oh. Look, Newcastle are going to want some kind of resolution to this, I think, before the start of the season, which is a week and a half away. I would be surprised if it's still rumbling on right until the end of the transfer window. I just think the numbers that are involved here, like it's an eye-watering sum of money. It's going to be a Premier League transfer record. I don't think you can leave that until the dying embers of the transfer window. I think it needs to be signed and sealed and sorted and boxed off early doors. So I don't think it's one that's going to go in a long time. I think Newcastle are desperate for an answer from Sesko. I'm waiting by my phone for information on that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the next 24 to 48 hours, and then that should then begin a domino effect. If Newcastle don't get Sesko and Sesko pushes for Manchester United, and look, I think there's probably an internal fear within Newcastle that Sesko is waiting on Manchester United due to the fact that they're a bigger club historically, and the fact that they probably offered him more wages as well than what Newcastle can. If the Manchester United thing happens, then Newcastle have got a problem, and in turn, you guys have got a bit of a problem as well, because I honestly do not see Newcastle, from what I'm hearing, allowing Isak to go without a ready-made replacement. So I still see a situation where he starts the season as a Newcastle player if they fail to get Sesko, or if they've got anyone else on their list who they deem to be a like-for-like replacement to Isak. So it's still up in the air. If you'd asked me that question 24, 48 hours ago, I would have said 50-50. It seems a bit more like 70-30 now that Newcastle get Sesko. And obviously, once they get Sesko, Liverpool still need to come in with an appropriate offer. But I would be very remiss of Liverpool to get to that stage when actually the deal is on and they don't come up with funds. That would surprise me if they're going to go to the lengths that they've gone to get him, to then have that opportunity is there and they don't stump up the money. So it's going to be. It's going to be really, really intriguing these next sort of week to 10 days to see what happens. It's the sort of one, due to the fact that it's a domino effect, we could see change on this one pretty quickly. Although I've been saying that for about 4 weeks now.
Yeah, I'm sure something will give eventually, Keith. Absolutely top man. Thank you so much for joining me. Really, really appreciate it. Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care. I'll see you soon. That was a clip from Transfer Insight. To check out the whole show, head to redmenplus.com or click the link in the description.